A major change in leadership at the top at the University of Iowa. We will, of course, discuss the tenure of one Gary BARTA, the second most tenured athletic director in the Big Ten. Welcome to the Voice of College Football as we break down Iowa football with each one of you every week here on a Tuesday at the Voice of College Football. Tuesday, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central, with Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey will dive even further into the Gary BARTA decision later tonight. We will give you the details on that. Corey, we don't get to see your face, but hopefully we can hear you. How are you doing?
Doing good. We'll be on. I'll get you on camera. I'll get myself on camera here in a few minutes. But I will say this: couple things. Just think about this for a second. We delay the show this week from Tuesday until Friday. All right. I happened to post a video about Gary BARTA's blunders just 2 days ago. So you determine if you want if that's a coincidence or not.
Well, it's good timing on your part. I just play along and just play to your lead on these things. So when it concerns Iowa athletics, we defer to Corey each and every time. So Corey has been on the money in regards to his timing this week. I will say, Corey, that you did produce a video earlier this week. I did not get a chance to see it, but wasn't there something in the title that referred to Gary BARTA's behavior recently?
Yeah, his puzzling. I called it puzzling behavior. I went back and forth. Do I title this odd behavior, strange behavior? I went with puzzling behavior, and it had to do with his lack of communication and lack of excitement in regards to Iowa's NIL collective. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure, in the next hour. But this is, I'm not trying to celebrate a guy who's walking away. I'm sure, I'm not saying he's done no good at Iowa over the course of 17 years. I have to call a spade, as I always try to do on this show. And the fact of the matter is, I think this is fabulous news for Iowa fans. I think it's fabulous news. I'm not saying it will produce exactly the results that Iowa fans want, but this needed to happen, and it's happening August 1st.
Okay, so we can possibly separate in a lot of people's careers, their career accomplishments, their very best work, what they produced at their zenith versus maybe the way things ended, or their ability at the conclusion of their tenure at a particular job. So would you consider that to be accurate, that Gary BARTA accomplished much at Iowa, but this was just good timing in regards to his current ability to lead this program, both on the field results and off the field issues?
Yes, and Mark, I'm going to lose you in 2 seconds because I'm just switching over devices, and so I'll be back in like 2 minutes. But let me just say this. You've got to give him credit for a couple of things. Everyone wants to credit him for fundraising. I don't know that you credit him as much as some people want to make it out to be. I think it's pretty easy to fundraise with Iowa donors and Iowa fans the way they are, but people have always credited him for that. And he's also hired some good coaches, Fran McCaffrey, Rick Heller. He's done well to keep Kirk there when Kirk had opportunities to go elsewhere. So give credit where credit is due. But at this point, I think it's the best move.
Okay, so we can either cut you loose right now and wait for you to come back on, or we can just continue to go until you need to make that transition. Okay, apparently Corey's going to make that transition from in the car and audio only to joining us here in just a couple minutes. So we will, of course, invite all of you to leave your comments and questions. Consider supporting the channel and what we do here at the Voice of College Football. Corey is a primary part of that, obviously, with our show here each and every Tuesday being the hub at everything that we do here at the Voice of College Football. So consider supporting us through your contributions. Please like the video, share these videos out on social media, let people know that we are here talking Iowa football with all of you each and every week. And again, Corey's going to join us here in just a second to get back on the BARTA theme. 11 Big Ten championships under his direction. 59 years old, 17 years on the job, which makes him the second most tenured athletic director in the conference to Ohio State's Gene Smith. In looking at the various articles that were posted today at the major sites, I saw two particular cohorts of Gary BARTA's chime in a very positive manner. One being Bob Bowlesby, the former Big 12 commissioner and former athletic director at Iowa, and then also Gene Smith, who the aforementioned dean of Big Ten athletic directors at Ohio State, hugely successful there, of course. We're going to get a little deeper conversation on this when Corey can jump back in, but there's a number of components that are key in assessing any athletic director's success. One would be hiring. That comes to mind first and foremost, unless a particular AD's tenure is just completely dragged down by issues and lawsuits, legal problems, off the field issues. Yes, unless that completely weighs down programs, NCAA investigations, all of that. The first and foremost job of an athletic director is to hire quality staff, head coaches. The head coaches lead the program. The head coaches are the ones that are primarily responsible for wins and losses on the field and success of that particular program. So did Gary BARTA do a fine job hiring? That's the first question to be answered. On the surface, I believe, as Corey alluded to, that would be a yes. And then secondly, is fundraising, the ability to manage the budget and to be able to lead the program from a financial standpoint, which becomes ever more increasingly important as we forward into the 21st century and beyond. Corey, good to see you.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Just tell everybody my phone died. I don't know what people heard, but my phone died as I was pulling up to my home. So
I think we heard just about most of that. My initial thoughts, Corey, and because most of this is going to be me setting you up because you're closely covering this program on a daily basis. I'm number one, covering everyone. Number two, I'm covering just football. But I was addressing, as you were popping back on here, I was addressing, aside from anybody's particular tenure being weighed down by legal issues, NCAA issues, those sorts of things, that first and foremost, when I think of an athletic director and evaluating their performance, I think of hires. And you started to address that, both men's and women's basketball, with retaining Kirk. So let's hit that area first and foremost in terms of your assessment. And again, you started to hit on it, of Gary BARTA's ability to hire quality coaches.
Well, he's also failed at hiring quality coach. I mean, not everyone's been a success. Todd Licklider was a failure at Iowa. I mean, I know we had Devin Archie, who's a former Iowa basketball player who lives and breathes Todd Licklider and swears by him. But his record, he was here 3 years, and every year their best player transferred at the end of the year, and they were boring to watch, and they were not a good basketball team. So that was not a successful hire by Gary. But Gary bounced back and hired Fran McCaffrey. And I know some Iowa fans don't like Fran, but he's turned them back into basically what they were under Tom Davis. Once the Tom Davis era was established, that's basically where we're at now. Struggling to get to the second weekend, but perennially in the tournament. So, it's if you like that or not, it is what it is. So that was a good hire. Rick Heller, tremendous hire there. But the baseball team is in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament this week. They're likely, almost certainly, in the NCAA tournament, knock on wood, because you never know what that committee's going to do. Joey Woody, bring him in for track and field. He's been a saving grace. They've struggled on the volleyball side of things. Obviously, they've been really good in wrestling, second best program in the country behind Penn State. For a program that's, Penn State and Iowa, two best programs in the country historically. So, he's done a good job from that perspective. One could argue, well, he kind of got fortunate with a couple of those hires. Maybe that's the case. But you got to get, again, I'm all for giving credit where credit is due. Like I said before, maybe this got cut off, but this whole idea of, well, Gary BARTA is a tremendous fundraiser. I don't buy that. Like, maybe he was, but I think a lot of people could fundraise in that position at Iowa, Mark. I really do. I think it's my guess is, and we don't know because it's been 17 years since we've had a different AD. And Bob Bowlesby was a little rough around the edges. So I'm sure Gary appeals to people in different ways than Bob did. But my guess is whoever comes in here, whether they're a former coach or the businessman type of employee, whoever comes in is probably going to be able to pick up where Gary left off from a fundraising standpoint. And you look at all the other variables at play with the relationship with the collective, the NIL side of things, and the Brian Ferentz situation. We've talked about the many scandals. If you want to call them scandals, that's what they are under Gary BARTA's leadership. I'm just calling a spade a spade. It is what it is. Right now, the university is still under investigation because of gambling issues. Now, maybe we're making a mountain out of a molehill with that, but that's the fact of the matter is they are under investigation for gambling issues. That's what it is. They had the Rhabdo gate under Chris Doyle, and that was under Gary BARTA's oversight as well. All right. The 2020 racial discrimination stuff, whether you believed all of that or not, that was under Gary BARTA's leadership. There have been PR blunders as it relates to Title IX. And you think about the field hockey situation, the Jane Meyer, Tracy Griesbaum field hockey situation. That was a disaster that cost the university a lot of money. Speaking of disasters and costing money, they had to pay over $1 million to get Chris Doyle to leave. You go down the list. I mean, it's just over and over and over and over again. He had blunders with Gary Dolphin, how he handled the Gary Dolphin situation. They got rid of swimming and they brought in female wrestling, which I don't have any problem with female wrestling, but that ended up causing some Title IX problems. It's just over and over again, to me, blunders of decision-making and PR moves. And it was time for this. It was time for this. And I hope Gary has a great retirement. I don't have anything against the man personally, but to me, this is what was best for the university and for this athletic department.
Corey, back to the hiring portion of this. This is neither a knock against Gary BARTA. This is just something that he didn't have to face. And think about the coincidence involved here. He is the second most tenured athletic director in the conference, has to be one of the more tenured athletic directors in the country. Think about this. If he was anywhere else in the country over the course of 17 years, he would have had to hire a football coach. He's in the only place in the country where there's not been a football coach. Off the top of my head, I cannot. No. There is not another place in the country where there's not needed to be a football coach hired in the last 17 years. And unless we're talking Kansas, Duke, and a couple other places, that's going to be that would be at the top of our conversation, would be who did you hire as your head football coach, as your money-making program, and who was that? And that's a neutral situation because he didn't have to deal with that.
Head football coach.
Football coach.
Head football coach, because if we want to get politically correct and technical here, Gary had to sign off on the whole Brian Ferentz hiring in the first place because Brian was Kirk's son. But you're absolutely right. And credit, I think there's no question about it. If this was a situation where Iowa retained, no offense to Tom Allen, or not Tom Allen, I think not Tom Allen. Who's the guy? Thinking of a coach that didn't work out, Lovie Smith. If they retained Lovie Smith level of production for the last 17 years, then that's no credit to Gary BARTA. But the fact is they have a legend who's a Hall of Famer in Kirk Ferentz that Gary has managed to retain here for many years. I know some Iowa fans are tired of Kirk Ferentz, but Mark, you know this better than anybody. Kirk was one of the top candidates for some major NFL jobs over the course of several different postseasons and off seasons, and they got him to stay. And how much is that? How much of that is credit to Gary BARTA? I'm not going to discredit him for that. I think you have to look at that. If we're going to blame Gary BARTA for some, or at least give him some of the responsibility for some of the blunders, then you also have to give him some of the credit for some of the pluses, right? So you give him credit for being able to retain Kirk during a time where he was a hot commodity nationally, and but things change, right? And so at the time, I didn't have an issue with Gary. I didn't have an issue with Gary 10 years ago, even though there had been some issues. This is a cumulative effect when all these things occur, and it just seems to be an issue. I mean, don't forget the state auditor, Iowa state auditor, got involved and called for his resignation just a couple of months ago following the latest racial discrimination suit settlement. So many things. I don't want to say that Iowa forced him out. Whether they did or not, I don't know. Certainly, they're not going to paint it that way. Gary did release a statement today through the university that basically said it was a difficult decision, took a lot of prayer and took a lot of thought, and he loves Iowa, etc. So they're never going to paint it that he was forced out. But regardless, now the attention turns to who does Iowa bring in, and I have my thoughts on who I think they probably should bring in, and I also have my thoughts on who I think they probably will bring in, and those are two different things, unfortunately.
Okay, hold that thought, because of course we want to get there, because that's what's most important now. However, you know me, I like to have context to the numbers, because you can throw out a number and then I need to know, okay, where does this stand? 11 Big Ten championships. So I don't know what the numbers across the conference landscape are. That I would like to know that. I start reading articles about Gary BARTA so I can reacquaint myself with some of his accomplishments and issues. And I see 11 Big Ten championships. I don't know where that ranks. So again, I would have to look into that, number one. Number two would be to get back to these off the field issues. It's impossible, regardless of how good you are in a job that's that massive with that much responsibility, to keep track of everything at all times. However, again, based on my knowledge of what's going on in athletic departments across the country, that amount of issues to that magnitude seems, and most of those since about 2017, seem egregious for a 5-year span.
Yeah, I agree. That's the problem. I mean, that's the problem, right? I mean, how long are you going to allow these things to continue? Now, we could also sit here and speculate that Gary BARTA's decision to allow Kirk to retain Brian during this past offseason, which was unprecedented, right? I mean, it happened the year prior. One could argue Brian should have lost his job last season after last year. He didn't. But after this past year, one would think absolutely, like they got to move him, even though he's Kirk Ferentz's son. So what Gary did in allowing Kirk, regardless of who you think holds total power in this athletic department, the fact that Gary allowed that to continue during this offseason, one could argue that this announcement now makes more sense. Because what reason would Gary have to rock that boat and do anything that would affect his relationship with Iowa, with Kirk, etc., when he knows he's moving out? Now, maybe he didn't make this decision until last week. We don't know. But as I've said before, I've made this comment, I think, on this show. I'm not predicting anything, but I would not be shocked if this is Kirk Ferentz's last season at Iowa. I wouldn't. I just wouldn't. You wonder if this is kind of setting up that way with what they've done in the transfer portal and just everything. I would not be shocked if that happens.
I completely see it as well. The schedule sets up well for them. The roster makeup, the personnel additions, the divisions going away the following season, everything sets up for a nice season for Iowa football. That could be a nice moving off, launching pad to his retirement for Kirk beyond now. Let's hit these super chats and then we'll get to the next item here. Lemansky, thank you so much for the contribution. Quote, if you wish upon a star, dreams do come true. We just got better. Lemansky, we appreciate you. Another super chat coming in from Erica. Erica, thank you so much for this. I am not needing to guess where Erica's opinion lies here. Will Bob Stoops be AD or head coach at some point? I don't think so, as cool as that would be, but would love both of your opinions on that. Erica, we will get to that in just a second. Lemansky comes back with Bump Elliott and Bob Bowlesby's success at Iowa in their careers outside their Hawkeye years far exceed Gary's.
I mean, you could. I don't necessarily disagree with Lemansky, but Bob Bowlesby. I mean, was Steve Alford a great hire? I mean, there's pros and cons with all these guys, right? Now, I will say this as it relates to Lemansky's comment and future hirings. Mark, who do you think when you think of like and I'm thinking obviously Big Ten because I'm a Big Ten guy as you are. But if you're thinking about legendary Big Ten ADs, who are the first few ADs that come to mind? And I'll give you the first 3 that come to my mind.
Okay, because I've not thought about this in a long time. Go ahead.
Oh, well, first of all, I think Bump Elliott would have to be on the list.
Sure.
I think Barry Alvarez should be on the list. And I think Tom Osborne, if I squint, I know that he, it's hard to separate what he did as a coach and what he did as an AD. I guess that's for me, but those are the guys I think of when I think of big name ADs. Maybe that's because of their coaching careers prior. But my point is, I think some of the, you can tell me maybe across the national scene if I'm right or wrong on this, but from what I have seen, my observations, it seems like the better ADs, at least from a football standpoint, are usually former coaches. And so my thinking on this is, people talk about Bob Stoops. Well, sure, should he be in the conversation? Yeah, probably, right? I mean, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't his name be tossed around? Would he want that? I have no clue. Probably not. But what my fear here is that Iowa is going to make a move not based on who the best candidate for the football program is, which is obviously the most important program within the athletic department, whether you want to admit it or not. My fear is they're going to make, I don't want to say an agenda-driven decision, but what I don't want to see is them make a decision based on who's the best businessman or best businesswoman, if that makes sense. If you kind of get the gist of what I'm saying, Mark. I don't know that I was going to go after somebody like Bob Stoops. Obviously Kirk Ferentz, would Kirk be interested in the job? I mean, if he was, I don't think he would be, right? You could have it. Listen, if Kirk wanted to be an AD, which I don't think he does, heck, you could have an interim AD for a year, and then when Kirk walks away, he could just jump over to AD. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could potentially. Here's a name. How about this name? Dan McCarney.
Okay.
Would Dan McCarney be a possibility? He's a former coach. He's a guy who has proven he's fine with making tough decisions. I mean, let's just talk about the jump from Iowa to Iowa State. How about that jump? That was whether you think it's legitimate or not, it was a tough decision for him to make that move when he did. He was willing to do it. You got to be able to make tough decisions in this position. And I don't think Dan McCarney for a second is afraid of doing that. And he also has a good relationship. I'm assuming he has a good relationship with Kirk.
Well, if you have football success, especially in this conference where football is magnified even beyond what it is in any other conference, excluding possibly the SEC, of course, you're going to be given more credit for football success. What is interesting to note, and our buddy Tony Altimore, who brings the charts and the graphs and the metrics that some people dispute, but what you can't dispute is the athletic calculations that he brings, because that's just pure fact. And it's interesting to note that success in football usually breeds success in all the sports.
Sure. That's fair.
So usually when you're successful at football, you're successful at everything, or the majority of the sports, especially the other revenue sports going into men's and women's basketball.
Yeah, that's fair. And if you just look at anecdotal marks on that, Alabama right now is, you think of Alabama and you maybe not right off the bat think, well, that's probably going to be a powerhouse of an athletic institution. But right now they're one of the best basketball programs in the country. That didn't happen overnight. Now, obviously, coaching and all that, hires and whatnot, that is affected. Ohio State is traditionally one of the strongest athletic departments in the country. I think it's fair to say that a lot of that has to do with basketball. So you go down the list. I think you're right on that.
Yeah, and I was thinking of other athletic directors during one of Michigan's more successful stints here in the last 3 to 4 decades. After being the head coach at Michigan, Bo Schembechler was the athletic director at Michigan. There you go, another legendary coach. Ohio State, though, has had a run of non-football coaches as athletic director, and they seem to be doing just fine.
Well, yes. However, what's the current AD?
Gene Smith.
Yeah, Gene Smith was in Iowa State. He'd proven himself at Iowa State, hadn't he? Isn't that fair?
Yeah, I was just responding to your
Yeah, but the
you're
coaches.
coming about coaches, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying that there's not truth to that.
What I'm saying,
citing Ohio State.
yeah, I think if I'm an Iowa fan and I want to feel good about a hire, I'd like to see someone who's look. I mean, hiring a former coach doesn't mean he knows anything about being an AD, so it may not work out. But I think from a fan's standpoint, a lot of fans would prefer to see or number one, a coach that has connections to Iowa that they trust. Obviously, Barry Alvarez would be like top of the list because he's been an AD. He has Iowa connections, but I don't think Barry's walked away from Wisconsin to just be the AD at Iowa. I don't think that's the case. So that's why I didn't throw his name out there. But someone like that. And then B, if you can't do that or don't want to do that, go after somebody who has proven themselves as an AD at a power program. That's hard to do, right? Get somebody from a Power 5 program. I mean, I just think that, again, you probably have a better feel for that than I do, but transitioning to an administrative position like athletic director, that's probably quite a jump if you're talking about even a MAC school or a group of 5 school or an FCS school. That's a different level of everything. And what I'm afraid of, what Iowa does is they go after somebody like that, a small name, which has kind of been the mindset of how Iowa recruits football players over the years, right? They go after FCS and group of 5 players typically, or they just go after somebody who is already within the athletic department but has no experience being an AD, coaching a major sport, or at least major sport is in football. That's what I fear may happen. But, it's very similar to the situation with Brian. And I wish Brian success this year because of the pieces that they brought in. And I commend the coaching staff for making some adjustments like they have personnel wise. But just like I said with Brian several months ago, and I noted that any change at offensive coordinator is probably a good change. No offense to Brian. That's just how, it's hard to say it's not when you have maybe the worst offense in the country. Leadership under Gary Barta of late has been about as poor as I can imagine. Frankly, that's my opinion. It's been about as poor as I can imagine. There have been success stories within the department, no question about it. But some of the blunders and some of the lawsuits and the scandals have been ridiculous. As you said, egregious was the word you used. So I would like to think that whoever Iowa hires, as long as they're not, hiring somebody from the corner Kmart, they're probably going to be able to get somebody who is at this point in their lives an upgrade from what Gary Barta brought from a PR standpoint, from a decision-making standpoint, etc. And maybe I'm being harsh on Gary Barta. I'm not trying to be. That's just my thought on the situation.
Well, I'll go in this direction. I think it's similar to what works as a head football coach, and this could go to other sports, but the football model is an easy one to see. The head football coach and his strengths versus what the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator bring to those two sides of the ball. In that, when you talked about not necessarily getting a financial person or somebody of that background, what you do is you go after what we're talking about, somebody that's got connections within the state, somebody with a strong personality, somebody with vision, somebody that's a great communicator, somebody that again, that is a proven leader. And then you have the deputy athletic director, or I don't know, the other personnel positions within the department. Then you go strong in that direction for the details, the minutia, the accounting, the fundraising. Although if you've got a strong voice at the top, the fundraising, as you mentioned off the top, falls into place to a certain extent, and especially at a very loyal institution that we see at Iowa with its fan base.
Let me tell you the other concern that I think as an Iowa fan it's fair to have at this point. I think it's fair to look at the situation and say, I hope Iowa doesn't hire somebody to counteract or account for some of the problems it's experienced over the years, which meaning they've had a gender discrimination lawsuit. They've had a racial discrimination lawsuit. Like, I want them to hire the best candidate out there, regardless of race, regardless of gender, all of that. They need to hire just like with a football coach, you hire the best candidate.
Yes.
I'm not saying that the president of Iowa is going to go, and the Board of Regents are going to go hire an AD that just fits those different, you know what I'm saying, right?
And if that individual fits those other descriptors, that's great.
Great,
That's
fantastic. But that hire with a view to who's qualified is what I'm saying, regardless. And you and I both know, Mark, that we live in the world of agenda-driven decision makers, and it's. I hope that doesn't happen here. That's what I would say. I don't have reason to think it would happen here, but given some of the shortcomings of Gary BARTA, couldn't you see a scenario? I'm not saying I was going to do it, but couldn't you see a scenario where an institution looks at that and says, "Ooh, what have we had problems with? What did Gary have problems with? We better
prove something.
We better prove right now that we're turning the corner here, and let's do it by means of who we hire."
And then 3 or 4 years later down the line, you have other issues, and your teams are not performing to the degree, and you've made some bad coaching hires, and all of that goodwill up front in the optics, nobody cares about at that point.
Yeah.
Erica, thank you so much for the super chat. Again, we read Erica's super chat. Corey did address the Bob Stoops. Anything else on that, Corey? I would just say that I have always been impressed with Bob Stoops as a human being and as a football coach, who always seemed, based on a number of components that I won't get into here, able to take on a bigger leadership role. So I could see him as an AD.
I would like to know a reason, and I'm going to have, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, you and I are going here for an hour until 6 o'clock Central, and then I'll be on with Coach Don Patterson at 7 Central on my channel. So we'll be talking with fans and taking calls at 7. And I think Don will be a great person to weigh in on this very subject. But I'd like someone to give me a reason why Bob Stoops isn't a good candidate. Like, I know that's the trendy name out there. Why wouldn't he be a good candidate? Just explain it to me. Like, what was it that guys like Bump Elliott and Barry Alvarez didn't have at those respective institutions, or that did have that Bob Stoops doesn't have? And I think it's fair to say, like, somebody was it Erica mentioned Chuck Long. With all due respect, Chuck Long is not qualified to be the athletic director at Iowa. Okay. Yeah. And one could argue that Chuck was not a good head coach at the college level. That is what it is. I mean, he really wasn't. So my point is, yeah, I love Chuck Long. Don't get me wrong, but I think part of the reason why head coaches often make good ADs, and Don will attest to this, is their ability to oversee, their ability at oversight, right? As a head football coach is totally different than any major sport coach, right? Like, it's different than your head basketball coach, your head wrestling coach. It's totally different because you got all these coaches who are coaching individual groups, and your job is not to micromanage each group. Your job is to oversee everybody below you, beneath you. And so that is what an AD does on a much bigger scale. And yes, it you're having to deal with other sports. I get that, in the hiring process, and there's other things at play here that maybe certainly a head coach doesn't deal with. But I think that's often what makes a former head coach successful as an AD.
Yes,
and Bob Stoops.
It's a model.
That.
It's a model of what you're going to encounter as the AD.
Yep.
You're dealing with 105 what we could call employees just on the football team, in addition to the staff. 125 or 30 with analysts and trainers and everybody involved. Probably more like 130 to 40 individuals that you have to have some level of oversight over, or be able to manage the managers to have the oversight over those individuals. So yeah, there are different levels of leadership, and at a certain point of leadership, you have to be able to not just manage employees, you've got to be able to evaluate people who manage those employees, to evaluate them, to coach them, to bring them along, to be able to recognize their strengths and their weaknesses, where they fit best, where you need to walk alongside of them, where you need to devote 70% of your time over here and 30 here, and not 50-50. You need to be able to, and I think the other portion of the football end of that goes into it, that comes right alongside what you're talking about, is when you run that massive of a program at the level we're talking, Oklahoma, Iowa, and you do it for years and years and years. Talking Bob Stoops, off the top of my head, let's say 17 years at Oklahoma, Kirk at 23, 24 years at Iowa, then we've many of us who have been around different industries and different jobs, you understand that once, if you have an interest in that industry and you've been at a particular position, once you've kind of locked down what you do and understand it and gain some leadership and maybe oversight over individuals, you start to become involved in other aspects of what goes on in terms of finances, marketing, accounting, whatever is involved in that industry. And that's what I think happens with these football coaches is they know the football and they know how to run a football organization. They then become more heavily involved, both by their own interest and then just by the need of them being they're more popular than the athletic director. They are the face of, in many cases, the entire athletic department and being kind of pulled into those situations.
And a couple of things too. I saw somebody on Twitter earlier said, "Well, what about like guys, something like Fred Hoiberg?" First of all, Fred Hoiberg is, I can't imagine him leaving. He's a former basketball coach. I'm not saying that there's probably examples of ADs that are former basketball players and head coaches, but what we just talked about, there is something to being a head football coach that's much different than being a head basketball coach. Fred Hoiberg has no connections to Iowa other than he played at Iowa State and, he was close to the Chris Street situation. I know Iowa fans have a lot of respect for Fred Hoiberg, but that's great. But I saw that name tossed around. I don't know where that's coming from. Second thing is, you look at the situation with Bob Stoops and, we as fans, and that's what I am, I'm a fan first. You look at the situation, you think this makes sense. And Mark, what normally happens when you say that? This makes sense. Usually it goes in the total opposite direction, especially at Iowa, right? Like the decisions that make sense don't normally happen. So I'm not even convinced Bob Stoops is done coaching. Are you? Are you convinced that he doesn't want to coach anymore?
Well, I'm not convinced. No.
I mean, frankly, maybe he doesn't want to recruit anymore. Maybe that's the case. But I mean, he's still coaching the XFL, which I get is sort of I think more of a hobby than anything. But I don't know. Maybe he wants to coach. Maybe he does want to get back into coaching. Maybe he wants to coach in the NFL. I have no idea. But if he jumps to being an AD at Iowa, isn't that kind of, maybe I'm wrong, but isn't that kind of saying I'm done coaching?
Yeah.
Like, great job, right? I mean, if he could get a job as AD at Iowa, fabulous. That might be his dream thing. But I think he would probably feel like, not to speak for Bob, but my guess is he'd kind of feel like that's closing the door on ever coaching again. So who knows if that would ever happen. I'd be interested to talk to Bob about it, but I think I got to get Bob on the show, Mark. I'm sure he won't talk about this specifically, but I got to get Bob on the show at some point.
Yeah, that would be phenomenal. Our buddy Cole, the Nebraska fan, is chiming in with Iowa AD Brian Ferentz, taking a little jab there. The real Hayden. Thank you for the contribution. To quote an Iowa State senator, the stench of Iowa City is gone. Praise be to Allah. Okay.
You forgot the LOL at the end there, Mark.
LOL.
That's not the first time I've seen a comment very similar to that. It's probably the 60th time I've heard that today, Mark.
I have never typed an LOL in my life to anyone.
Really?
No.
Never? You just do it just because
Never.
You just don't want to do it? Or
I figure my words should stand on their own. The person should either get my humor or not. And if they don't, that sometimes makes it even more amusing for further response back and forth.
Okay.
I do make some considerations for women. Women are kind of different. Kind of have to deal with them with some emojis and, make it a little bit more of a.
I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure I've said LOL to you before in texting. Pretty sure.
Probably. I know you have.
I say it a lot.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, just for me personally. S. Dave 007, Brian Ferentz's direct supervisor announces retirement.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Per the books.
Brian will be reporting to the new or interim athletic director. Beth Getz, of course, most recently at Ball State as a sitting athletic director, now moves to Iowa. How long has she been in that position? Do you know off the top of your head?
Not very long.
Deputy athletic director?
Not very long. That's a good question. When did she get hired? She was. I've seen that name. Like, no, I'm not talking about Dino, but people have been tossing that around all day. I found it funny that some of the writers, Iowa beat writers, won't name who, but that tossed that name out right away. Oh, watch for Beth Gates. Like, that's a real, or Beth Getz. What a original thought. Like,
the
it
next
could be the
person
deputy
in line.
Yeah, it could be the deputy AD. Well, duh. Obviously, it could be the deputy AD, and maybe it will be. And if Beth, she was the AD at Ball State, correct?
Yes.
So she was the AD at Ball State. I don't know about Ball State athletics, but she moved from there to here to not be an AD. So maybe that was the ultimate plan. I don't know, but if that happens, I wish her all the best. Again, I don't know enough about her to comment, but that would probably be my guess as to who they hire. I'd rather, just not knowing much about Beth, I would rather hire Beth, given her resume of being an AD somewhere, than just someone else because they fit a certain agenda or criteria, as opposed to just purely resume as an athletic director or head coach. Yeah, cool. 1.5. Lemansky says 1.5 years. That sounds accurate, because I was thinking it was about a year ago. So he says 1.5 years at Iowa.
Cole, thank you so much for another contribution there. Is this the beginning of the end of the Ferentz era?
I don't really think this affects that. I don't think that affects it at all. And let me just say, based on what I don't know that Kirk and Gary were as buddy as people think they are. I really don't, based on what I know. So, like, I don't think this affects that. It may look. It's if Brian doesn't fulfill the obligations of the contract that Gary BARTA was a part of formulating, the 25 points per game and the 7 wins for the regular season. If that doesn't happen, sure, then this change does potentially affect the Ferentz future, the Ferentz era, because technically he's got a different supervisor now. Technically, whether it's Beth or it's someone else is going to have to make that decision ultimately, whether they retain Brian or not. Remember, the stipulations of that contract do not state that if Brian doesn't fulfill his end of the bargain that he's fired. It means that his contract is terminated. We don't know exactly what that means. So it does affect the Ferentz era, but I don't know that it affects. I made the comment earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if Kirk retires after this season. I stand by that, but you and I both talked about this long before this announcement ever occurred. It just fits in with what it. Now that I've seen Gary make this decision, I would not be surprised if he, it's kind of common knowledge of what's happening, but I could be wrong on that.
Erica, thank you so much for the contribution. We appreciate it. Based on what he said on his channel, Bob does not seem to want to deal with NIL or recruiting, etc. And that's a good point, and that ran through my mind as well. Just anyone who has not been through the current college football landscape and getting back into it with the transfer portal and NIL.
What channel? What channel is she
I don't know.
Talking about?
Said on his channel. Maybe Bob Stoops
Bob
has
have
a channel. Great.
Bob's got a channel. How about that? And he's talking about he's talking about NIL, I guess. Explain, Erica.
Everybody's got a channel these days.
I guess so. Yeah.
Lemansky coming back with what you had cited, Beth Getz at 1.5 years at Iowa. Thank you, Lemansky.
So Mark, just top of your mind, she says Bob Stoops has his own channel on YouTube. Okay. I didn't realize that. I don't subscribe, Mark. I don't subscribe.
I'll have to look it up.
That's on both of us, right? That we don't know that how does Erica know that Bob Stoops has his own channel? That's what I want to know. Should we Google that right now?
I'm looking it up right now.
As you're doing that, Mark, can you give us an idea? Just give me your thoughts. I know you're not as connected to Iowa, but do you have any names that pop off the chart besides obviously, promoting the deputy AD or a Bob Stoops or something like that? Do you have any other names that you can think of nationally that might be a candidate?
I really don't. And I will come back with some names next week. Let's do that, because I've not given it any thought. The first I saw of this was your post 3 or 4 hours ago, something like that. And have been out and about, and I just made it back myself not long before you did to start up the show. So I've not given any thought to this.
There's Bobby. There's Bobby talking, Mark. I love it. Isn't that great?
Yeah, what is this? So this is just
does he have more subscribers than I do, Mark? How many subscribers does Coach? He does. He's got 7,000 subscribers.
It's about having dedicated subscribers.
I cannot endorse Bob Stoops' channel because it's competition, I guess. He's breaking down XFL football, apparently.
Yeah, that's his latest video, it appears.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's what he's doing in all these videos, is he's going through his football team, although he's talking a lot of Oklahoma football, bowl games, so forth and so on.
Can we agree on one thing, Mark? He was not given a fair shake at Fox. Like, I don't think if you watch those big noon kickoff shows, I tell you, it's amazing how much the conversation would be dominated by the other panelists. Like, he hardly got to say anything. I think he was probably the most insightful on that program.
I sometimes have to separate. So I think most people listen with their emotions, not with their minds.
Sure.
I hope not to be one of those people. I listen mostly with my ears and it connecting with my minds, especially considering, football and other than more important issues. But Bob Stoops he's not a very dynamic personality on television.
No, he's not.
So I think that takes away from it.
Yeah.
And so you have to listen to him. I do think that Urban Meyer is better. Urban Meyer's really good.
I agree. Urban Meyer's really good, but you don't get tired of listening to who are we?
Oh, Reggie
Bush and Matt Leinart. Matt Leinart.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care about either one of those guys. I just don't care. So, couple of
you don't care.
I don't care.
You don't care because they're no good at what
I
they
don't
do?
care because Reggie Bush is a cheater, and I don't care because Matt Leinart is washed up. That's why I don't care. Too harsh? Is that harsh?
Well, I'm not understanding the second. I understand the first.
Reggie Bush is a cheater, right? We've established that.
Yeah, he's a cheater. He could be really good at football, and he was, of course. So he could have now being good on the field and being able to communicate that or dissect the game are two different things. And Reggie Bush has never said anything, to my recollection, that ever caused me to know more about football ever.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he's that good. Frankly, I know we're going on a tangent here. What's the dude for Howard Griffith? Does he ever say anything that tangible?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like him. He seems like a great guy.
Yes, he does seem like a great guy. And if I have the
guy.
opportunity to have any of these guys, not that I've tried to have them on my show, then obviously I'm going to treat them with all due respect.
And maybe I'm being harsh on Matt Leinart. Really good college football player. No question. I'm not.
Yes.
Don't get me wrong.
A great college football player.
Sure. Absolutely. Won a Heisman, right?
Yes.
So I'm not saying he's a great college football player, was not a very successful NFL player. I think we'll agree on that. No, I just don't like a bunch of USC homers dominating the conversation when you have people like Bob Stoops and Urban Meyer at your disposal, two of the greatest coaches of the modern era. That's my problem with it.
They want younger people, not young, but younger people to connect to them.
I get it.
Yeah, I tread lightly when we start to talk about announcers because unless I don't like the person, I just tread lightly because I want to give them all their due respect for maybe not earning, but being given the opportunity that they have to do what they do, and don't want to let my personal bias get into some type of criticism of their abilities.
And Mark, to segue back to this original conversation about Gary BARTA.
Yeah.
And again, this will be discussed. I know we're getting close to winding this show down. This will be discussed during our show with Don tonight. My immediate reaction, go back and watch the segment that we cut out from the live show with Brad Heinrichs, leader of the Iowa Swarm, the Swarm Collective. cut out that segment, posted it a few days ago about BARTA's behavior and lack of communication with Brad, and with lack of seeming lack of desire to promote the collective that is the biggest initiative behind right now. It's the biggest initiative behind major recruiting at Iowa. And to me, that's my biggest takeaway from this. Like, yes, BARTA's cost Iowa. You could argue, as Rob Sand, the Iowa auditor, has argued, he has cost Iowa millions of dollars in lawsuits. He's hired some good coaches, give him credit for that. He's had some major PR blunders, some major Title IX issues. But the bottom line is right now, relating to football, basketball, women's basketball, the University of Iowa needs an athletic director who is willing to work hard to support Iowa's major NIL collective. There are ADs across the country doing that, actively promoting their respective collectives. And Gary BARTA is not. He's not. He doesn't communicate. So he's not helping in very simple way. I mean, when I said that anybody else who comes in there, virtually anybody is likely going to be an upgrade, I'm thinking in one major way, and that is that simple way of promoting. Like, Mark, if you were Iowa's AD, I'm confident you would do a lot better job at promoting the NIL collective. And I'm not making too big of a deal out of this collective. It is really, really important to recruiting. And if you don't believe it is, go back and watch the show with Brad we had a couple of weeks ago. And that's why I titled that video a couple of days ago, Strange Behavior. It's odd. I don't know how to explain why Gary BARTA has been hesitant to promote the NIL collective. It's totally within the rules to do so. And there are programs across the country doing it. And, the whole thing, I know several months back, it became public knowledge, and Brad talked about it on our show, that Gary and the athletic department refused to hand over contact information for season ticket holders. That is not against the rules, okay? There are other institutions doing that. And is there speculation that that's Gary trying to compensate for some of the Title IX issues and other problems by being overly strict with seemingly confidential information? Or is it possibly a fear that donations toward the Swarm will take away from donor money to Iowa directly? I don't know. I mean, that's a fair question. But again, this is not something that's optional at this point. The collective and NIL initiatives at this level have to be supported and endorsed by the powers that be. And I think, based on what I know, Kirk is all about supporting the collective. This is not a Kirk Ferentz problem. This specifically is not a Kirk Ferentz problem. So anybody who comes in here, my hope and my expectation is that they will actively work to embolden the relationship between the athletic department and the Swarm collective, which is a huge, huge factor with recruiting the best players in the country.
Yeah, you have to be able to separate your own personal preferences and then separate those versus the way the game's played now, meaning the game off the field with NIL and transfer portal. And if you have too much of an issue of that, maybe the result is what we're seeing today. Maybe it's Gary BARTA stepping away from the program because he doesn't like the direction that college athletics have taken, and he has decided to check out. And maybe that's one of the reasons why.
Or maybe the people above him don't like the fact that he has not supported these things. That's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the case, great, because those are the changes that need to take place. And, like I said, I expect now the relationship between the Swarm collective and Iowa to improve. I do. I don't know why it wouldn't. It absolutely should. And that is going to help. That in and of itself will help Iowa athletics.
I'm amused by the comment made here by Lemansky. It's completely true. The first comment here where he says, Corey's rants help your show, Mark. Of course, that's why we've got, well, this is not the reason I've got Corey here because of his rants. It's because he's really good at what he does and has great insight and so forth. BARTA Iowa value shining through. I got to tell you, Lemansky, I don't know that there's a person in college football media that spouts off on values more than I do. My goodness, I get called out every day on social media about what I spout off about.
Have I been ranting today, Mark?
No, you've not been ranting. You
Maybe,
have.
This is hey, look,
it's a big day.
And I was not on social media throwing a party. I saw so many people, all these GIFs and memes and all these things, thank your lucky stars, all that. I was not in a celebratory, going in a celebratory direction on social media. But I think anybody who has listened to my show and knows my opinions on the situation, that I believe this is a good day for the University of Iowa. And I wish Gary BARTA all the best. It's got nothing to do with anything personally, but I think from a business standpoint, this is the best decision for Iowa. I have heard from some people, some of the same people that are going to be critical regardless of the move. Like if Brian Ferentz walked away tomorrow, which he's the most polarizing figure in Iowa athletics, even more so than Gary. If he walked away tomorrow and said, I'm done, I can't do it anymore, I owe the fans so much more than I'm giving them, I want my dad to hire the best candidate, and I think Bob Stoops should be the next head. Like he can say everything right and walk away, which would please 95% of Iowa fans. There would still be a very loud 5% that would say it's a bad idea. So I know there's people out there that are speculating about how this is going to end up being a bad decision. I don't buy into that at all. I see it as I see it. This is a good day for Iowa, and now we wait and see the next move. He's not, by the way, he's not gone until August 1st. Here's what's, and I'll talk about this a little bit more too on the show with Don tonight. Here's what's ironic about this whole situation. Again, as I said at the outset of the show, we were scheduled to go live Tuesday. Okay. For reasons that we won't divulge here, we pushed the show back until Friday at 5. I'm pretty glad we did that, Mark. That's the first part. Second part is just so happened to publish that cut about Gary BARTA and some of his blunders, 2.5 days ago. All right. That worked out fairly well as far as timing. And then the other thing is, how about this? This is something you don't know, Mark. Yesterday, I called the athletic department, and I'll just tell you, this isn't confidential. Called the athletic department and had a request in. Yeah, as of yesterday, had a request in to get Gary BARTA on my show for an interview. And basically the wheels had started to maybe turn on that. I hadn't gotten a firm yes, but they wanted to know what we wanted to talk about. So I gave them an outline of that. And I heard back again from communications today that we might be able to make that happen in early to mid-June. But I did not know this. I did not know this news was coming. Somebody that I know that did know about this news yesterday hinted at it with me yesterday, and I didn't realize this individual was hinting at it until this morning. When the news broke, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, okay, that's what this person was saying." So, point is, this all worked out timing-wise. You hope it works out timing-wise for the football program, because there are decisions that are going to be potentially tough decisions. We'll see what happens with the season, this upcoming season. But I am happy. I'd love to get Gary BARTA on this show. He's got an open invitation to come on this show. And Mark, that I will be respectful to him and ask him difficult questions, but I'll be respectful in doing so. I've invited Brian Ferentz on this show as well. I've not gotten a response. Doesn't mean he's, maybe he hasn't received my request, but I am more than welcome to respectfully have conversation with people that I don't necessarily agree with. And Gary BARTA is one of those people, for the most part, that I've not agreed with a lot of the moves that he's made. But I'd love to be able to discuss them in a respectful fashion on the show.
I wonder if your request would be taken differently if you both requested Phil Parker and Brian Ferentz.
That's a good question. That's a good question. Kirk hasn't come on the show. I've invited Kirk on a couple of times. So I've been accused of being an Iowa of Kirk Ferentz hater. So
no,
well, that's why I've
not at all.
That narrative of people who follow this show and follow my show, that narrative is out there. And I'm sure if, again, Kirk Ferentz has got bigger fish to fry than me talking on YouTube. But my guess is that if Kirk Ferentz is aware of things I've said, that probably hasn't rubbed him the right way. Just like there are certain beat writers who have wrote, and I'll give one of them credit, Pat Hardy, who I know a lot of Iowa fans don't like. Pat Hardy, he's been working Iowa media a long time, and I don't even know. I don't think his website is a subscriber website anymore, which kudos to him for working off local advertising. But he wrote a very, very negative article. I thought very pointed article following Kirk Ferentz's decision to double down or triple down on Brian this past offseason. And he deserves credit for that. Guys who are willing to go out there and, I don't want to say sacrifice their relationship with Kirk and the administration, but put it on the line. I think kudos to you, because you're saying, you're being honest, and you're saying what may not be in the best interest of you as an individual. And that's what I try to do on this show. My guess is that Kirk doesn't like it when people do that. I wouldn't like it if I was Kirk. Would you like it, Mark, if somebody wrote not a demeaning article, but a negative article about you and how you're favoring your son and you're not doing what's best for the program? Of course not. So anybody, I'm not just saying Pat Hardy, but anybody that does that, I'm sure that doesn't rub Kirk the right way, but he's human. So I don't blame him for that. I have an open invitation for him or any of the staff to come on the show.
In terms of anything that gets back to these coaches concerning, let's say, in this case, your comments about Kirk, if he didn't sit down himself and watch these videos, I hope that he and others would understand that what is going to come back to them, it's going to be the negative. So that's what's going to be the feedback back to them. And they should understand that, okay, without knowing, most likely this is the case, that it could be 95% positive, 5% negative, but that's what's going to come back to me. That's probably not taken into account much of the time.
And anybody that knows me knows I'm good friends with Don Patterson. I mean, this is not just, we have Don Patterson on here. Don Patterson and I chat all the time. We're not just friends in front of the screen. So, hopefully, I think anybody who knows me personally knows I have a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz. But again, as you are an excellent example of that, Mark. When you see something that you don't feel is right, or you have a strong opinion on, you're not afraid to say it in a respectful fashion. And that's what I think you and I both try to do on this show. And Don does the same thing. Don's got a personal relationship with Kirk. He's friends with Kirk, but Don has been critical of
absolutely.
Kirk.
And I am sometimes surprised, but I very much respect and admire Don being in a difficult position, but being very forthright and respectful, but still forthright in his opinions and evaluations of the football program and the football team.
And my guess is Don will come on our show this evening at 7 and be forthright and honest about Gary BARTA and his thoughts on the situation with that as well. And he'll be respectful about it. And that's why people like Don and Gary Close, add him into the mix. They're fabulous people to have on this platform, because they are great ambassadors to the sport, to the university, but they're also fair. They're fair critics. And that's what as an Iowa fan, I know that's what I would want to hear. If I'm tuning into a show like this, I'd want to hear fair criticism. And I think that's what those guys do.
Erica states here, the video that we pulled up on screen of Bob Stoops, where he talked about the current college football landscape, we could watch it. Yes, we could watch that at some point. Yes. Thank you, Erica. Appreciate your support. Again, 1 hour from now, over on From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Corey and Coach Don Patterson review Gary BARTA's tenure and what could be next for Iowa athletics. Corey, thank you so much for this. I knew that this would be a great conversation. We always enjoy whether we have an opinion one way or the other. It's doing what we do. We like to be on top of and respond to the news at hand and in the moment. And so that's what we are presented today. One of those items that don't happen very often. We're looking at 17 years that Gary BARTA has been the athletic director at the University of Iowa.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll be live with Don tonight at 7. May have another special guest coming on, so you'll have to tune in to see who that might be. But yeah, always fun, Mark, and we'll probably have something else to talk about. Next Tuesday, we'll resume our normal time next Tuesday. Thank you to everybody who showed up on a Friday, an abnormal time for us this evening.
Thanks, everyone. West Virginia Live at 8 o'clock Eastern time as well. Catch Corey and Coach Don Patterson in 1 hour at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. We'll see you back here next Tuesday.